Hey everyone, welcome back to Upside Down Data. Today I want to talk a little bit about HBAR, what I think DeFi adoption on HBAR might mean for it going forward, and do some price analysis. So both based on just what we can see here on TradingView, and also look at some of our models and see what they think of HBAR's recent price action. So, if you've been following HBAR, it's been, a pretty depressing, really ever since ultimately September, when we put in the all-time high. It's been more or less just in a downtrend ever since. I think what a lot of HBAR bulls are looking for, a lot of HBAR investors are looking for, is when are we maybe going to get some relief, and what could catalyze that kind of relief and lead to some notable price appreciation. So the first thing I wanted to talk about HBAR, which is a new development, something that's now different with HBAR versus how it was even back here, is the fact that HBAR is now seeing some decentralized finance adoption. So I'm over here on DeFi Llama, which has a great breakdown of different chains and the total value locked, so the dollar amount locked on chain in DeFi protocols on that particular chain. And so here is Hedera Hashgraph, HBAR. So it's sitting pretty low on the leaderboards right now, all the way down at 57, nowhere near the likes of, Ethereum, Binance Smart Chain, Avalanche, etc., all the way down there, and currently only has about $16.75 million locked on it. And we can actually just look to see, where is that mostly held, and it looks like Saucer Swap is one of the DEXs that's launched on Hedera Hashgraph, is the one that's responsible for most of that BVL. There's also Stater, which is a liquid staking protocol, but really I kind of view Saucer Swap as one of the more, it's the only one on here that's native exclusively to Hedera Hashgraph. And so it's kind of leading the charge in its kind of unique adoption. So Hedera Hashgraph is obviously very young in its DeFi adoption. Saucer Swap has only been live for a little while. I think only a couple months that it's been up. And so not a whole lot has happened. And also we're in the middle of a bear market. There's just less interest in crypto, so not as much money is moving in. But I think this is a good first step, right? I think one of the things that I talked about before with HBAR is that we needed to start seeing adoption. And now I know that Hedera Hashgraph has not been going the route of a lot of other blockchains, and that they've been focused less on DeFi and some of those other things. But it's not that they haven't focused on DeFi to some degree, or not that they don't want it. One of the things that came out, back in the spring of this year was that Hedera had a massive DeFi fund that they launched, basically this $155 million HBAR fund to try to incentivize people to build on Hedera Hashgraph. And so what you'd hope to see then is that this is not as far as we're going to get, right? We'd like to see a lot more protocols launch and a lot more total value locked get added. And you might ask the question, why am I talking about this? Why do I care about this? Who cares about DeFi? You might just think, well, it doesn't matter. Well, I would argue it actually matters a lot, because if we go up to the top of this leaderboard here and just look what protocols sit up here, these are ones that have had incredible price action in the last bull run. Phantom, Solana, Matic, Avalanche, assets that have gone absolutely nuts. Binance Smart Chain actually is an incredibly well-performing asset over its time. It's consistently gained on both Bitcoin and Ethereum in terms of its relative value to those. And so all of these protocols, and more recently Arbitrum and Optimism have been seeing a lot of interest. And Near has really grown. Kava has actually been seeing some new life with DeFi. The more that people start using these protocols for things like DeFi, the more value tends to get added to that network. That's just what has been happening. Avalanche went nuts largely on the back of its DeFi adoption. Same with Solana. It was DeFi and NFTs that really shot it up into the stratosphere. And I would argue that the reason why Binance Smart Chain remains so high is partly because of the thriving DeFi ecosystem that it has on it. And so that's where I'd really like to see Hedera Hashgraph start entering that pool. I mean, I know that the founders aren't necessarily, they've been more enterprise focused, less so marketing it towards retail. But why can't you have both, right? Hedera is capable of handling large numbers of transactions. Its smart contract capability is still pretty decent. I think it's currently around 350 smart contract executions per second, which is pretty good. Puts it at least on par with those other protocols. You'd like to see that happen, because that could then lead a lot of demand into the ecosystem, because that's ultimately what you want, right? You want some kind of stable demand, some kind of organic demand for the token that's not just speculation. That's one thing that DeFi can provide, that people would need HBAR to transact on HBAR, therefore they would need to be buying the token. So something that I am just going to be watching. I think it's a good first step, but I'd like to see this continue. And one of the things that I think is also useful to consider here is that in some ways HBAR's, no one wanted this bear market to happen, but in some ways HBAR might kind of in the long run be lucky that this did happen, because it took some of the pressure off, or at least the time pressure off, to get that kind of adoption, right? When we were in the middle of this mania phase, coming out of, or over here, coming out of the summer of 21, it was really not a lot of time for these projects to try to scoop up market share and DeFi to have their token share explode. One of the reasons I would argue that AVAX, for example, did so well going into the fall and winter there in late 21 was that it was one of the first ones to launch a massive DeFi incentive program, really attracted a lot of users and a lot of protocols to launch on it, which then really catapulted its price and its value, and it went, shooting off into the stratosphere. HBAR was slow to the punch there. HBAR wasn't on the same time scale. They weren't ready for that. And largely, HBAR, it did appreciate in price, but not to the same degree as those assets that were really able to capitalize on that DeFi adoption. And so what this bear market has bought Hedera Hashgraph is more time to build on the protocol, more time to let other developers build on the protocol, which now lets them, do things like actually potentially get more people to take advantage of this fund and start building. Gives the time for that to happen, so that when we get into that next bull run, that next bull phase in the market, Hedera Hashgraph might be a lot better set off to really capitalize, because if there's a lot of things built on top of it, once interest comes back into crypto, people will start to want to use those things. That will bring in new users, more people will be buying HBAR, that will increase the network effect, and that should ultimately, hopefully, lead to greater price appreciation. So that's why I personally am going to be watching DeFi adoption on Hedera Hashgraph very closely, because if it starts really gaining share here, getting a lot of protocols and getting more total value locked, that might just mean in that next time when we get a lot of interest in the space, it'll be better set up to really capitalize and shoot off into the higher. Without that, it would need to have some other native demand driver for me to feel like it's going to be capable of having as high of appreciation. So something that we should keep an eye on, in my opinion. So let's go ahead now and just talk a little bit more about the price action of HBAR and what we might kind of look for going forward from here. So I'm just going to start here, and then I'm going to switch over to some of the models that we have here on the channel to talk about what those are looking at. So the first thing I did just want to mention, though, was just looking at the visible volume profile within this range. Really kind of, I'm going to zoom in here, kind of coming off the all-time high through where we are right now. And if you're not familiar with this indicator, basically what it does is it takes the volume that has transacted on HBAR or Hedera Hashgraph over this time, and it just puts it at the different price levels. So how much of the volume has transacted in these price ranges, how much up here. And the reason that we care about this is it gives us some idea of where cost bases might sit, right? If a lot of volume took place, for example, up through here, that might mean there's still a decent number of people who hold coins that they bought at these levels. Likewise, down here, we have a high level of volume. Again, there's probably a good number of people who have their current cost basis down here. Anyone who's buying HBAR down here would have their cost basis down here. This helps us get an estimation or just an idea of maybe how many people that might be relative to other price points. And what I think we can really notice just looking at this is that, there's a lot of volume that's transacted down here, a little bit that's transacted down here. There's kind of this hole that exists right from around 11 cents all the way up to about 20 cents. And so what that tells me, or what that might suggest, is that if we can go rally from here, the market had a really kind of bullish day, today, as I record this on the 9th of September, Bitcoin rallied, somewhere in the ballpark of 10% to the upside. I didn't look to see where it ended on the close here today. Somewhere in that ballpark, the rest of the market, other assets were really going nuts. If this is going to be a bouncing point off the bottom of this range for HBAR, and we can start tracking our course to the upside, what I'd be looking for next is, can we break this resistance, this local high that we had here at around 8.4 cents here? And if we can do that, can we break then through this level up at around 10, 11 cents? Because if we can get above this level, then really we're not looking at any kind of strong resistance from a cost basis perspective, or people kind of wanting to get out at break even, until we get back up to about 20 cents. And if we were to make a move like that from where we are right now, you're talking about a 215% move to the upside, nothing sneeze at. And so really what I'm going to be watching for with HBAR is, can we go ahead and put in a new high? And if so, that might put that 20-cent target more in the crosshair. So still have a lot of work to get there, but something to look at. Okay, so let's go ahead and look at some of the models that we have here on the channel. Let's start with the upside downside potential indicator, or UDPI. So I'm showing you the long-term version of this model. Here's what moves that play out over months to years. So very much a macro-focused model. And so what this looks at is kind of these more market cycle dynamics. And so you can see this is a risk indicator. And so what it does is, as it gets closer to 5, kind of closer to the upside here, this suggests that the upside potential is exhausted and downside potential is more likely. And then vice versa, when you're down towards -5, that means the downside is exhausted. You're likely to be seeing upside going forward. And so you can just see how powerful this model is. It tells you, when good accumulation zones are, like down here, and then when you should probably be selling HBAR here, and then also, acquiring here. And then again, what you'll probably stands out is that this was, again, a big acquisition zone from this model's perspective. And we can see this a little bit more clearly if we just look at the raw levels of the UDPI across time. You can see it really shooting up to the upside here at these market cycle highs, getting up to 4 or 5 here, then getting up to 3 here, and then dropping all the way down below -4 over here. And so, anyone who would be watching the UDPI over this time would have been very happy to do so, right? Because this would have been telling you, take profits here, reload here, take profits here, and then this is a big accumulation zone is what it's pointing to all the way down here. And so what this suggests is, if we look at what's going on, what's interesting here is that the UDPI has been rising a little bit. Price has been kind of steady. So what this tells me is that the model is still very much bullish on HBAR going forward. There's a lot more room to the upside than the downside in its estimation in kind of the longer term, but it is pricing in some downside. So that's the one thing where, if we get a failed bounce here, it wouldn't be impossible for us to go and break down below these lows. And I think it would really depend on what the broader crypto market does. If the broader markets get bearish again and start tanking, I think HBAR is going to go along for the ride. But if that doesn't happen, there's still plenty of room left to the upside. And so overall, this model thinks the risk reward is more favorable than unfavorable here. But it's just also, pricing in the possibility that, further downside is not impossible. Just a caveat to keep in mind. But overall, the risk reward ratio for HBAR from the model's perspective is quite decent here. Now, another thing I want to show, and this is actually something that Joe had mentioned before, I'll bring it up again, is in collaboration with Jay over at Daily Crypto Analysis, we're putting together a website that's going to host our models live. So you're going to be able to access live UDPI data, not just for HBAR, but for all the different crypto assets that we follow. And I wanted to pull up the current view here just to kind of look at where HBAR sits in comparison to other crypto assets on the UDPI level. And so, let's imagine we are going to be starting to put in another bounce in the crypto market. Let's say this isn't a fake out. Let's say we are going to be able to start moving back to the upside. Where does HBAR's UDPI sit relative to other assets? What we can see is that it's actually pretty decent. It's pretty tasty relative to a lot of others, right? There are a few that are below, but overall, HBAR is sitting at a lower long-term UDPI level than most of these other assets. And same thing with this medium term. This is the version of the UDPI that cares about weeks to months in time frame. Again, sitting down below a lot of other assets, and same with the short-term UDPI, actually sitting quite a bit further down than a lot of other assets. So that's just another thing to suggest that if we get a bullish move from here, HBAR might be set up especially well to capitalize on it. Now that would be more of a kind of a short-term outlook. What I was talking about before with DeFi, I kind of view as a longer-term kind of thing that I think would be useful for HBAR. But in the short term, there's some things suggesting that if we do catch a bounce, HBAR might be able to move to a decent amount. All right, so that's what we're seeing from this. And so this website's not live yet. We'll be getting updates about when, that's going to happen. But I just wanted to give you a sneak peek of the types of information you'll be able to access with that website once it is live. Okay, so the final model I did just want to touch on here for HBAR is the momentum bias indicator, or MBI, because I think it's just an interesting model to keep an eye on. So this is a model that looks at momentum in the market for a given asset. So in this case for HBAR, and when you're green, when you're above 0, that's bullish momentum bias. That's when price is generally likely to be appreciating. That moves, basically the momentum is biased to the upside, and any corrections are likely to just get bought up and price is going to move up further. You go into the red, that tends to be in these more bearish times, and especially when you spend a lot of time in the red, that tends to happen in bear markets. And one of the things you see in bear markets, and this happens with basically every asset that you look at, actually I don't think I've looked at any assets where this behavior hasn't played out with a bear market. A bear market is very distinct on the MBI because you'll see this exact behavior play out where you'll spend a lot of time in the red, poke your head above zero, get rejected, go down, set new lows, poke your head above zero, and then in this case, potentially get rejected. But what I want to talk about now is, does that mean we're just going to go see new lows? You know, you can say, well, this exact same kind of thing just happened, right? We went up, got rejected. Does that mean a big capitulation is coming? Well, maybe, but the other thing that's possible, and this is something I talked about before as well, is that when you're in this period that kind of is a transition between kind of more bearishness and then more bullishness, you know, HBAR doesn't have a great example because mostly it was just kind of in a bull market through this time. What you'll tend to see is this kind of beginning of an oscillation around zero, where you spend a little bit of time above, a little bit of time below, come back up, a bit of time above, below, above, below. And that tends to play out in these kind of transition zones, these accumulation zones that can lead into bull runs. So what I would be looking for is that if we do catch a big bounce here and prices are able to start moving up with HBAR, start seeing the MBI start to engage in that behavior. And even if we just kind of chop sideways on the HBAR price, you know, kind of like what happened here, we're more or less sideways for, you know, basically a year going through this time. That same dynamic starts playing out where there's not really a whole lot happening, but we start seeing this oscillation. That tends to actually be a sign of accumulation before bullish turns. So that's something that is in a more macro sense, something I'm going to be keeping an eye on. So to kind of put this all together, if we just go back and look here, I think that if we do catch this bounce from a risk perspective, HBAR is set up quite nicely to be able to realize some decent upside from here. It's very overextended to the downside on the short, medium, and long-term UDPIs. And so a bounce from here could see very reasonable upside, you know, and something to the order of bringing us back up to 20 cents would not shock me in that type of scenario. But in the more macro sense, you know, the things I'm going to be looking for on the price action side is things like the MBI. Can we start putting in that more bullish behavior? Or is this just going to be a continuation of the bear market, a failed bounce here that'll bring us back down to newer lows? You know, that's something we're going to have to watch and see. But kind of in the longer term perspective, the thing that I'm going to be watching as well is adoption, adoption, adoption. I've said this before, I'll say it again, that I think HBAR is at a point in its life where it needs to start proving its worth, right? In some ways, the rubber needs to meet the road here. That so far, HBAR has been, you know, thriving on its promise. That can only get you so far. And we're at a point now in crypto where enough other projects are proving their value by gaining actual meaningful adoption that HBAR needs to join the party. And so part of that will be DeFi, part of that could be enterprise, you know, it could be a lot of things. But again, we need to start seeing that happen, because if all it is promise, 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 but never anything real, that starts calling into question the thesis. Because you can have the greatest technology in the world, if no one uses it, then that's going to limit its value. So that's something I'm going to watch. So of course, none of this is financial advice. You should make your own opinion about how to value these things or how to make your base cases for what's going to happen. But these are just the factors that I'm considering that I wanted to discuss today. All right, if you like the content, remember to subscribe to the channel, give the video a like and follow us on Twitter. A lot of updates about indicator